Oh, is class chat not open? Maybe. Okay, yeah. So I think 2 questions for the def function thing. That's just another way to that's a way to organize our code, right? We kind of talked about functions last week. It's good practice to define things as functions just because if you have a big program, right, you want to do a lot of things, then you would want to have that. Um, and also, yeah, for the true false boolean, you have this would be it would return as a boolean, right? Like if 9, 8, 7, like 9 is greater than 8 and 8 is greater than 7, that's true, right? So it would return true. If it was anything else, like if it was like 1, 2, 3, right? That's ascending, that's not descending. So then it would return false. But this would evaluate to be a boolean expression, true or false. All right, yeah. Looks like class chat should be open in a second. And you guys can ask questions there. All right, so let's go on into our slides for today then. Let me go right here. Okay, so the first topic that we're going to look at today is lists. So lists are what we call a container data type in Python. So container types store multiple things in just one variable. So they don't just have, like a string stores one string, right? Like it would store just hello, right? And that would be the only thing in there. But for lists, we can store, for example, we have this thing is defined as my list, and it's 1, 2, 3, um, hello, and 4.5, right? So something you can notice is that first for our syntax, we use square brackets, right? So square brackets around the whole expression, whatever you want to be inside your list, right? And you can have multiple different types of data in it, right? These first three are integers. This is a string, and this is a float, right? And then we can combine them all into just one container, right? And that's a list. So just to practice maybe the syntax, if you guys want to go ahead and define a list just quickly in the class chat. So, just same thing as this, right? Just a line of code, like my list is equal to, and then try to use at least 2 different data types in your list. So remember square brackets, each thing is separated by a comma. Let's give you guys like 2 minutes to do that, just so we can get a little familiar. These are looking good. Couple errors. Just make sure you guys are doing the backticks when you do the /run Python. After that, you need 3 of the backticks, right? Yeah, good. So, yeah, if you're not printing it, then it's gonna run without output, but some of you have printed it, which is good. I'll just print with the square brackets, right? Okay, pretty good. Let's go ahead and keep going. This. All right. Okay, so for indexing a list, right, since we have multiple items, we need some way to be able to like identify them, right? It's say we want to delete something, we want to put something in, right, at a certain position, we need an index. So the way that we index lists is we start at index 0 and it increases up to like however many there are, right? So you can have as many items as you want, right? Here we have 5 items total. But it goes to index 4 because it starts as 0, right? This is just something to keep in mind that it might not feel super intuitive at first, but you'll get used to it. The first item is not item number 1, it's item number 0. So you go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So if we wanted to print my list, the first item, right? You would put my list and then 2 brackets, you'd have 0, right? That's the syntax for that. If you want to identify the first element, it would just be like this. Now, say you want the third element, right, which is 1, 2, 3, that's the 3 here, right? You wouldn't use my list brackets 3. You're going to use 2, right? Because that's 0, 1, 2. It's at index 2. So the output for these two is shown right here, right? For the first one, it should just be 1. For this third one, it should just be 3. So this is the main thing to keep in mind here is that if you have a list, it starts at index 0, and you might be like tempted to go one greater for the index, but this is just how you should be doing it. Something that you could run into a problem if you say you have we have your 5 elements, right? And you're looking at you want the last element. So you would say, okay, I want index 5, right? But there is no index 5. It only goes up to index 4. So then you're going to get an error, and it's going to be like an out of bounds error or something. Replit will tell you something, and then you know that it's probably an indexing issue if you get something like that. All right. So if you guys have any questions on what's going on, you can keep asking them in the chat. All right. So let's go on to the next thing. All right, so list modification, right? If we want to change something, if we want to, make it into a different number or like a different like item entirely, right? We're going to just identify it using the same square brackets technique, right? And then we just reassign it to whatever we need it to be, right? So say we want the first element here, it's 1, we want it to be 4, right? Then we're just going to say my list element 0 is equal to 4 instead of 1. And then if we reprint it here, you can see that it should turn into this right here. That should be a... Right, so there are a couple more things we can do with lists. We can also add items to lists, right? So to do that, the function we use is called append. So if we want to append the number 4, right, you're going to say dot append 4. And it just, by default, it appends to the end of the list. So it will add itself to, it'll become the last element, right? If you want to add it to a certain position, right, like if you want to add it to position 1, there's a way to do that also, which we'll look at in a second. That would be inserting it into a list. But if you just want to add it on to the end, then you can use append. But if you want to go in a certain position, you'll have to do something different. Okay. Look at... Okay. And to remove from a list, we use the pop function. So to do that, right, it's just if we want to remove something, we would have, for example, same list, 1, 2, 3, hello, 4.5. If we do pop 3, then we don't get rid of like the number 3, right? You might think like, oh, there's like a 3 in there, so we're gonna get rid of that. We don't get rid of that, we get rid of element 3, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, hello goes away, we're left with 1, 2, 3, 4.5. So remove is just dot pop, right? The function is called pop. And again, same thing, you remove it through the index, right? The index of the list. All right. There's a short list of this, and I think I'll demonstrate a little bit in RepLIT, and then we can try a little bit of practice. But here are some other functions that we can look at first. So we have this list, right? And index 2, right? This would just be what is the index of like the first occurrence of this number. So if we have, we're looking for where 2 is, right, in this list. So it's at 0, 1, 2, right? So it's at the second space, or it's at the third space technically, but it's at index 2. So Python will return 2. Count is how many occurrences of that number there are. So for count 1, it would say, okay, there are 2 ones in this list. So we're going to return 2, right? Remove 3. So it's the same thing, kind of works by index, right? Same thing as pop. So 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So it gets rid of the 4, and you're left with just these 5 elements. All right, so these 3 are kind of new. So we have sort, right? That just puts them in order. So ascending to descending, right? So if we had 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 5, it should switch the 4 and the 3, which it did. It returns 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, and say you want it to be in descending order, right? Then you would use the function reverse, which just it reverses the whole list. So if you apply it here, it's not just like to turn it into descending order, it flips the whole list around, right? Last element becomes the first element, this one becomes the second element, and so forth. And this is what I was talking about earlier with the append. So if say you want to add something to a list, but you don't want to add it just to the end, you want to add it at a certain position, right? Then you're going to use the insert function. So 4 is the index you want it to be at, and then this is the element that you want to add. So the index would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it would end up being right here, which I guess this happens to be a 3 already, but you would have you would go ahead and add in a 3 there, and then what happens to the rest of the elements is they just shift over 1. So instead of the next element being at index like 5, right, or index 4, it would be at index 5 now. So it just takes the place of index 4, everything else just moves over 1. All right, this is a really helpful function. Length my list is going to be 6, right, because there are 6 things here. So if you want to ever find, this is especially helpful if you want to find, say, like the last element of a list, right? You can use the length minus 1, right? Because if say you don't know how long the list is, but you want the last element, right? So you're going to say, okay, well, I know there's length number of things. Minus 1, that's the index of the last thing, right? Because remember, index starts at 0, so it's always going to be 1 smaller than how you might think of it. Like, oh, that's the second thing, right? But that's index 1. And just a little thing here, we can combine them too, right? We can turn them into like kind of, we can just use like multiple functions on top of each other. So here what happens is you sort it, you put it in ascending order, you reverse it, which then turns it into descending order, right? And then we look for element 0, right? The first element. So what happens is we sort it, okay, now it should look like that, right? And then we reverse it, so it should now be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1. And then the very first element should just be 5, right? So that checks out. All right, so any questions on any of these functions, you guys can keep asking those. I think let's try to find, um, look at a few of these. Yeah, so think David answered this one. Pop and remove, right? Pop is for specific indexes. Remove three, it would just remove like the first three it sees, right? So if there are two of them, it doesn't care, it just goes for the first one. Okay, so I think let's do a quick kind of check and let's go ahead and so define, you can use the same list as you used earlier and go ahead and print out the sum of the first and the last elements of the list. So I'm going to write it down here as well on the screen just so you guys can refer back to it. But go ahead and try this and post your answer in the class chat. So comment. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share for now. Yeah, so some of you guys are doing kind of like a hard code version of this where you know you have three elements. You're saying, okay, I want the index 0 and index 2. Try to do it in a try to do it so that it's like it works for any list. So the way you can get the last element number is the length minus 1 should be your index. And yeah, let me reshare the actual thing. Here we go. So a couple of you guys are making this small error of you're just adding the length onto like your first element. So you're doing like, say your list is literally called list, right? You have list 0 and then you're adding length. But you want to repeat the list, right? You need list and then length of list minus 1, right? In the brackets. Give you guys maybe another minute and then I'll show you my solution. All right, so for the way that I would do this is let's go ahead and just say I have my list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so I know some of the first and last things should be 6, so let's see if I can get 6. I'd print out my list. I want the first thing that's at index 0, right? So I do the square brackets and then I do 0. And then if I want the last element, what I could do, right, since I know that my list is 5 things long, could say, okay, my list 4, right? Because I know that's index 4. But I want this to work for any list, right? It's generally a good coding practice to have like code that could work for any version of what you're defining, right? Even if you're like list specifically, it works for that. But for general use, we could do my list length of my list, right? And then minus 1, right? Because in this indexing starts at 0. So we would have this. So let me go ahead and just run this. And we get 6. So that checks out. And a couple of you are doing index minus 1, which is also, that works to find the last element. If you did my list, if you did like this, that should get you the last thing too. So that's also fine. Okay, so yeah, that's our code for this. Let me just spread out a little bit so you guys can see it. And all right, hopefully you guys have any more questions, you can ask them. Yeah, so I use numbers. If you guys use like letters plus numbers, or if you use like letters, like if this was like I don't know, like an A and this is like B, it'll just print out A, B, right? It'll just concatenate them together. But if they're numbers, it'll just add them up. All right. Well, so that is our part on lists. I think as chat looks like it is kind of slowing down. So let's go ahead and move on to our second topic for today. So we'll be combining lists and conditionals, or our next topic, conditionals, into a progress check. So just keep lists in your mind. All right, so for conditional statements they execute based on whether some Boolean condition, right? Boolean, remember that's true or false. Whether it's true or false, right? Then, like, if, say, I want to write a program, right? Like a very basic sort of like weather app thing, and I pass in this Boolean that is called like is raining, right? Like, is it raining or not? And if it is raining, right, I'll say, bring an umbrella. And if it's not raining, if is raining is false, right, I'll say, okay, don't bring an umbrella, right? Then for that, I need to be able to use a conditional statement. So the syntax for Python is if and then parentheses, you need the parentheses. Some Boolean condition is true, right? So like, let's see if I can write on this. Give me a second. Okay, yeah. So if like is raining, right? Then I would say, okay, print like whatever I want to print out, right? Like bring an umbrella. So this code only executes if this is true, right? If this isn't true, this is false, then it just kind of goes over this and it goes to a next block. So the next block, if we have this is called elif, it's else if, right? If you're familiar with also any other languages, it's called else if in those. But what it means, right, is if this isn't true, then I'll go to this block. If that also isn't true, then I'll go to the last block, I'll go to else. This middle block is it's not necessary all the time, right? Sometimes we only have two cases. So then you wouldn't have this block and you would just have if else. But you can't have if and elif without an else. You need if you're going to use elif at all, you need all three of these. If you're just going to use if and else, that's also fine. If you only have two cases, right? Like in the is raining case, it's either raining or it's not, right? There's no like middle case there. So we don't need elif, we could just have if and else. Now, just remember the way the Python kind of like uses its syntax is through indents, right? Like just indentations. See how this code is indented in, and this code again indented in, but these three if, elif, else aren't, right? Because they are kind of like your starting, right? And the block in should be indented. So there's also a colon here. When you code on Replit, it should automatically be doing that for you. Like when you write the if, this, and you put the colon, the next line should automatically be indented. But if you don't indent it and something goes wrong, then you will get an error. So if you get like I think it's called indentation error. So if you get something like that, you know that that's what went wrong. So that's the general syntax for this. And let's go down to next slide. All right, so Boolean operators. The last class we looked at arithmetic operators, right? So that was all the like plus and like the the floor division, the modulus, the exponent, right? Boolean operators are also called logical operators. They're used for our cases, right? Like if I have this is another case where we could use that if I want to check if someone is an adult or not, right? And I pass in age. So if age is greater than or equal to 18, right? That's our definition of an adult. Then I could print the person is an adult, right? And then else the person would not be an adult, right? So that's our this operator. That's greater than or equal to. Same thing, less than or equal to. We also have greater than or less than. Same thing, just they don't include that number, right? Check if two values are equal. That's equal to. So an error that you guys are probably going to run into a lot is when you say like say if I want to check if they're exactly 18, right? I would have to say if, right? If age is equal to with two equal signs after another 18. You're going to be you're going to want to write it with just one equal to sign, but if you do that, you're going to get an error because one equal to sign is actually the assignment operator in Python, right? That would be like, oh, if I want a to be 2, then a equals 2, right? So that's why they're different operators, just so that Python can differentiate between them, right? That's why you have to write them with two equal to signs. In a similar vein, if you want to check if two things are unequal, right, then you would have a exclamation point and equal to. It's also known as just like a not equal to. Any exclamation point is like referred to as just not. It just makes it the opposite, right? So this would be just not equal to. All right. And again, if you happen to know maybe Java or something else, you might be familiar with what these two are. They're the and or operators. So if I want to say like age is equal to 18 and like their favorite color is blue or something, right? Then I would say, okay, let's say age, or let me just write the second part. So this would be age is equal to 18. And then in Python, it's actually kind of nice. We get to just use the word and. That's the difference in syntax. We just literally spell out like and then it would be whatever case you have here. So say we want like whatever it is, like color is equal to blue, right? And that would be equal to blue. And yeah, we just need to be mindful of also the parentheses. They go around the whole expression, and then we would have a colon, and then whatever we want to execute after that we can do, right? So that's these two. That's and or, but again, this is the logical operator sign, but the like actual word you're gonna use, the actual syntax you're gonna use in Python is this and this, just the actual English words. Right. Cool. Let me just hop over to see if there's anything in class chat has been answered. Okay. Cool. So let's go on to our next thing. So it looks like we have our progress check. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time to look at this. So let's go ahead and start. It says write a function list summation. So, it's like def list summation that takes in a list as input. The function should sort and reverse the list. It should calculate the sum of the first and last item in the resulting list and return the sum if it is greater than 10. If it is equal to 10, it should return just right. Otherwise, it should return too small. So here's an example. 4, 5, 9, 3. Okay, well, we can tell this is not sorted. So if it was sorted, it would become 3, 4, 5, 9, and then you would add up the first and the last elements, and that would be 12, right? So we should return 12. Since that's greater than 10, right, we return the sum. That's if it's greater than 10. If it's equal to 10, it should return, this, otherwise too small. So you already did the sum of the first and last, right? But you guys are going to add on to your code a little bit, and you're going to add some conditionals, right? Because you're going to need all three. You're going to need if, elif, and else for this problem. Right, so same thing, go ahead and try this and put your code in the chat, and then we will go over the solution. Okay, your guys' code is looking pretty good. I'm gonna give you guys a few more minutes. Okay, so I think it's looking pretty good. Um, your guys' conditionals look good. Maybe another minute for anyone to get them in. Yeah, a couple of you guys are getting confused with the input. So it's not asking for like a list from user input. It's asking you to kind of like write a function that you can call and like give it input. So like it would be like def, I'm just gonna shorten it as like ls, list summation, right? And in parentheses you'll have say like my list, right? And then when you actually call the function, you're gonna pass in um, like list summation, and then you can pass in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 4, 5, 9, 3, whatever you want. Let me go back once again. So I think let's go ahead and look at my solution now. Let's go over here. Okay, so we have this. Again, this is the, like, just define the function and the thing that we're passing in, right? I think we use the word input, so it was like a little bit confusing, but you're calling the function and passing this in, right? So we have this in parentheses. We wanted to sort it and then we wanted to reverse it, right? So we can do dot sort and dot reverse. If you wanted, you could have just put it in one line. You could have just done this, right? Remember, just combining those two. Um, right here we have dot sort, dot reverse, and then sum is the same thing as we looked at earlier. With 0 is the index of the first element, and again length of input list minus 1. Um, that's our last element, right? This whole expression. Or you could have, again, you could have just done minus 1 instead of this. All right, and for the conditional, right, this is the part that's kind of new. If this sum is greater than 10, we want to return that sum. Elif, it is right, it's just equal to 10, then you're going to return just right. And else, right, you're going to return too small. So I didn't see anybody really put in like unfinished conditional blocks, but we can't have like an if and elif. We can only have an if and else. Um, and we should, if we have a function, right, that is supposed to be returning something, all of these should have like returns in it, right? Just because when you print this, if you want it to return, then you should be returning something every block here, right? All right, so we can kind of test our code here. This is our example, right? And we know that this should return 12 because if we sort it, reverse it, the sum of the first and last should be 12. So let's go and run it and see if that happens. Yep, 12. So again, if you wanted to change it, like maybe let's make this into I'll change that. Let's change this into 1, and then this would be 4. Right, so the sum of this should be um if we sort it, it'll be 1, 3, 4, 5, right? And then if we reverse it, it'll just be the opposite, but the sum should still be 6, the first and last. So we should get too small. Yep, too small. So it's good practice to generally just check all your cases for your conditionals, just to make sure that it is running well. So say if that's like 11, we should get, or if it was, I guess we want it to be, let's make this Yeah, let's use something that's like 0, 1, to 10, right? And this should add up to this 10 because the first and last, when sorted in reverse, will be 10. Should get just right. All right, so hopefully the solution makes sense. I'm going to show you the slide solution as well, but it should look very similar to this. And it's right here. And you guys have these slides, so if you want to also refer back to that, this is basically the same thing. Okay, cool. So let me just see if there are any questions on that. All right, cool. So for our homework problems, we have 2 homework problems this week, and hopefully you guys are all joined in the code forces. It should be in the announcements if you're not. Announcements or resources. I think it's in announcements. And you should be joined on that so you can submit your work there. Okay, let me see. Yeah, so for a list of random numbers as input, you are going to need to take it from like user input. So what you're going to need to do for that is you can like split the list into like, or I guess it kind of, yeah, you can take each element individually from the user if you want. So a little bit might be like kind of like inefficient, but if you don't want to, if you like can't figure out a split or something, you can assign like say you want a list like my list oh, and you could do, or let me just write it in the replit actually. So you could do like my list 0 equals like int input, enter the first number, something like that. And you could also keep going. For our split, right, you can also, like if you have a string like this, you have your string would be like, let me actually check, is this words or letters? One letter. Okay, so if you did input, right, like my list, let me just call this like, you had like string input and the user enters like, say like hello world or something, right? That's gonna be like this, and like a string. And if you wanted to split this up into like a list that looks like you'll have hello and you'll have comma, right, world, you're gonna need to use the split function. So that would be looking like, you can just kind of like a couple ways, but let me look at here. You would have, and then this should just turn it into this list. So that's a little bit different, right, but than what we did with the because it just passed in like the list. But if you want it from user input, you could do it the way with like kind of just taking in every element, or you can use the split method. Okay, so I think let's go ahead and I think should be good for today. Again, the homework help channel, this channel will close, but the homework help channel will be open and you guys can answer any or you can ask any questions there and we will be answering them. And then we'll go over the homework on during Friday's class as well. All right, so thanks everyone for another great class. Make sure you guys are in Code Forces so you can see the problems. And I will see you all on Friday.